I've had experiences on both sides of the fence. About 10 years ago, I used to run an outsourcing company for First Consulting Group and have consumed services both in Canada when I was a CIO up there as well as at UVA. I think the market has definitely changed. It used to be that you selected a partner for a particular project or implementation effort, and so that was a big deal. Hundreds of millions of dollars, couple years, and but then it was over. Everybody went home. And now, many of those are done with, but what you really need, what I really needed at UVA, was a trusted partner that I could go to when I needed 3 of these or 4 of those for 2 months and so forth, but that I could go to repeatedly because it was just too expensive to have to start with a blank sheet of paper every time you needed some assistance. About 3.5 years ago, we came to HCTec and said, hey, we're going to need to put together a project team of 100 plus people and run this project for a couple years, but we don't have any extra people sitting around from our internal IT team to staff this. So we're going to need to hire up. And HCTec did a marvelous job of helping us to get the people that we needed quickly. And Ryan and I were actually talking yesterday that there's no way we could have done that internally. I mean, even with the entire university's HR office, we could not have identified, recruited, and onboarded that many people in that short a time. But that was a big implementation project, and as we all know, there aren't as many of those taking place these days. So what's going to substitute for those?
Yeah.
And I think what does substitute is the continuous work. So IT is so embedded in every process now in healthcare that every time you want to change, improve a process, whether it's a clinical process, a financial process, a patient-facing process, there have to be changes to the supporting IT systems. And most places don't have the internal team to be able to do that. In general, the sea change in the CIO job is the transition from being the provider of technology to being an enabler of business processes. And as I talked about a bit before, everything that happens today in an organization, and in particular in a healthcare organization, is tied to information and technology. And so the CIO is not just the concierge providing that technology or that information, but it's the CIO who has to work with the business leaders to ensure that they're effectively utilizing it. And that's a lot more difficult a job than just serving up a new system or a new technology or information. And I think it's a struggle for most organizations in that we're now at a place where the technology's actually gotten ahead of the work processes that are supported by the technology. And in particular, as parochial as healthcare is, it's we don't yet have the processes to consume the technology and use it to enable improvement in our business. And we're getting there, but I think it's a particular challenge for a CIO in that a CIO now can't be successful as simply a technology provider. They can only be successful as a member of the leadership team, achieving business outcomes. Well, certainly it's a large business risk, and I emphasize the business part because it's not the CIO's job exclusively to measure what you're going to do to mitigate that business risk versus the magnitude of the risk. So we all know you can spend hundreds of millions of dollars to attempt to make your organization super secure and yet still have a breach. So are you better off investing at that magnitude in order to prevent something that might happen, or are you better off investing at a lower magnitude and taking more risk? Obviously a business decision, but it's a difficult decision for business leaders because they don't have the experience and the understanding of the risk. If you go to a hospital and say, well, what's the risk that we're going to make a mistake in a surgery and have a medical malpractice lawsuit, everybody pretty much understands how that's going to play out or how it could play out.
Right.
But what's the risk that we're going to lose or expose 50,000 patients' records, and what's going to happen then? Our business leaders are only now beginning to understand it. And so it's a difficult decision for organizations to decide how much insurance they're going to buy. Almost every large healthcare organization that I know of, the position of Chief Information Security Officer has been created.
Okay.
That position most of the time reports to the CIO, but not always. Sometimes they report to the compliance officer, sometimes they report to the chief operating officer or whatever. But exactly as you said, you need a specialist who eats and sleeps cybersecurity, because it is a 7x24 risk and requires super special knowledge of what to do to mitigate the risk. But I think in particular for mid-tier organizations, they're just not going to be able to recruit and retain a chief information security officer, 2 or 3 analysts, buy the tools that are necessary to instrument your system so you know what's going on and whether in fact, or not whether, but how you're being attacked. So I think there is a market for cybersecurity providers that can augment or in some cases completely replace the cybersecurity staff, in particular mid-tier organizations.